And interestingly enough, the more we dug into it, the more we realized we already have a lot of these technologies. We've been working on a lot of these technologies for many, many years, whether it be background automation, leveraging occupancy sensing, and just making things happen without having to interact with the room at all, or working on people counting with our collaboration system so that we can generate some very rich metrics in how these rooms are being used. Since we have those technologies already there and underlying, we can use them in new and different ways, which we'll talk about in this presentation. So overall, Gensler did an interesting study to determine, now that folks have been away from the office for some time, they took this research in the summertime. Do you intend to go back to the office? And if so, what does that look like? And interestingly, overwhelmingly, 70% of the respondents said that they look to go back most of the time, whether that's 3 or 4 days a week. And the remaining some are looking to go back, 1 or 2 days a week, or maybe somewhat less frequently. So we have to create workspaces that accommodate regular attendance, and also workspaces that accommodate flexible use. So that's where things like scheduling and signage and notification and finding spaces to use comes into play very heavily. So let's just kind of take a spin through the average user's day as they come to the office and what that looks like. So these rooms are scheduled, and using Crestron signage and indication technologies, it's very easy to determine which rooms are immediately available and which rooms aren't. And the fact that these tie into a normal calendar that an administrator can administrate, this is something that can be managed. So in the very near term, there's probably going to be a push to manage how spaces are used very tightly, right? In the nearer the term, the more likely this is going to happen. But as time goes on, this technology remains useful, and a lot of companies have implemented this technology before the pandemic even happened. So we walk up to the space, we see that this space has it's been booked, people are in there, and it's reserved for the next 43 minutes. But what happens if they never showed up, right? So this is where we leverage things like the Crestron occupancy sensor in the space to determine, hey, the meeting was supposed to start 10 minutes ago, but there's still no one here. The occupancy sensor can then communicate to the scheduling panel, which in turn releases that room back to inventory so that other people can use it. So user walks up to the room, they see the scheduling panel, they see it's available, they can wake it up, they can see what the calendar looks like during the day, and they can reserve it right then and there to use. And now that room is reserved for their use. So this is kind of, in the beyond sense, how these rooms can be managed. And going back to that release back to inventory, that would be this whole process where the room was released back to inventory and is now rescheduled and used by someone else. That would be recovery. And as we know, the two biggest costs to any organization, one is going to be humans, the other one is going to be real estate. And these rooms, these meeting rooms, is really where those two things collide. So managing them as tightly as humanly possible is going to provide enduring value longer term. So now we go into the space, then what happens? The idea is the user doesn't have to do hardly anything to interact with the room to make it work. So again, leveraging Crestron's occupancy sensing technology, we invoke automation to just make stuff happen. User walks in, their sheer presence wakes up the room, turns on the display, selects to the right input, provides a welcome screen showing them how to present wirelessly. So they're up and running, presenting wirelessly, and they didn't have to touch a thing. They only use their own device. What that looks like under the hood, a Crestron occupancy sensor connected to our wireless presentation gateway via the network, and that same occupancy sensor can be reused to interact with the scheduling panel outside the room to do that decline for no show, release those rooms back to inventory. And we'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, that same occupancy sensor setup can provide some very rich data in how these rooms are being used by way of our XIO cloud product. So let's talk a little bit more about that AirMedia wireless presentation gateway once they're in the space. What we're showing here is canvassing mode. So we've got a presentation computer on the left and a presentation computer on the right. They're both being shown at the same time on the same screen. If someone comes along and uses an iPad or an iPhone, it's going to automatically rearrange the canvas to show the last connected source. So this is an optional feature. We can have it, last in, last out type of scenario, or we can have it automatically manage the canvas on the front of room display as well. What about when those rooms aren't actively presenting? No one's presenting wirelessly, no one is presenting via a wired input connection. We still have this device in the room, we still have this display in the room, we can make it do something useful. And in the near term, we can do things like reinforce company policy, right? And as time goes on, this becomes corporate messaging in general. One of the biggest conversations that we had with a bunch of users back in March and April was, how do I interact with these spaces without touching them, right? So I can't tell you the number of conversations I had about voice control in Crestron systems. Good news, Crestron has supported voice control for many years. Works really great in the residence. I use it at my home as well. I know some universities have implemented it as well. It's a great ADA solution, right? Because no one has to touch anything. But in your average meeting space, let's think about what that looks like. Start the meeting. Okay, great, that's easy enough. But what about selecting camera presets, volume up, down, mic mutes? Those actions that people normally do during a meeting, that can start to look a little messy. And for the average user just walking into the room and not knowing exactly what to say and how to invoke those actions, it can be confusing. It's probably not going to lead to a very good meeting experience. That's why touchscreens work so well. The button exists and it says something on the button, and that label pretty much indicates what that button's going to do, right? So an intuitive user interface with a decluttered, very simple UI is its own instruction set. So that is why Crestron has opted to pursue the personal device control. And this exists elsewhere, right? We're not the only ones in the world to do this, but the way we do it is a little unique. Most others leverage the network, and there's a network connection that happens between the personal device and the control system in the space. And that works, but it's not ideal in a lot of organizations, right? Because the implications there are the personal device and the control system can see each other, which means my infrastructure and someone's device are on the same network or can see each other via the network. That's not grand. So what we've done is we pursued a totally different approach, and it's Bluetooth based. So in our touchscreens is actually a Bluetooth radio, and it's existed there since those touchscreens have existed. And what we do is we pair the user device with the touchscreen in the background, and no one has to actively pair it. It's not like getting in a car and you have to pair it with PIN codes and things like that. It happens in the background. So as long as the user has the application, which is free, and has their Bluetooth turned on, this is something that they can do. They're going to open the app. It's going to discover available rooms that they can control. They're going to pick the room that they can control. Now, of course, people are thinking, well, what keeps them from controlling the room next door or down the hall? A range, right? But it's possible that you could see more than one space if they're a bunch of small spaces. So as soon as they select the room that they want to control, on the touchscreen pops up a QR code. That's the locality challenge. That makes sure that the user is actually in the space that they wish to control. They can either use their camera to scan that QR code, or they can enter the code that pops up right beneath the QR code. Then they're paired and away they go. And now they can have access to the most basic functions to control that space without having had to touch the common user interface. Okay. But the reality is, we're going to see a lot more video conferencing. I'm sure you've heard a lot about that today from other presenters. We don't disagree. We're going to see more and more video collaboration for a number of reasons. This is a study that we conducted. So this is a Crestron study for our top corporate customers, relative before pandemic and then during the summer, and how their views have changed. Interestingly enough, 50% said that they intended to add video solutions within the next 2 years, which doubled their predictions from early March, right? In a more urgent need, 20% of customers said that they want to add video teleconferencing immediately, right? So this supports a number of work paradigms. One, obviously, working from home, right? People need video collaboration to work from home. But in a hybrid environment where some folks are on site and some folks are off site, you need video collaboration in those spaces to join the participants together. You know, if we're limiting capacities on site, then some people are going to have to rotate in and out at home. But they're still going to need a way to collaborate, because collaboration is key, and that is, you know, one thing we hear over and over again. We need to get back to the office to collaborate. Those spontaneous interactions that lead to action plans that no one actually planned before. But another use case, and this actually I noticed before the pandemic, is folks joining video teleconference from within the same building, right? So I'd go to meetings at customer sites and we'd be in a conference room, but there would be someone in a remote, smaller huddle space in the same building, but it happened to be closer to their desk. So they just joined the meeting that way. So intra-office video teleconferencing is something that we expect to grow too, especially as meeting room capacities start to get limited. If you want to have the same size meeting, now we're going to need to use 2 rooms instead of 1. Crestron has a product to fit every room type, and this is important. From the smallest meeting spaces, even down to the personal desk, all the way up to the largest custom spaces. And you can think of things like all hand spaces, auditoriums, large multi-purpose rooms or training rooms. We're the only company that has a consistent user experience from those smallest spaces all the way up to the largest custom integrated spaces that LightWerks would deliver. We also have our new R series, which is a differentiator here. This is for rapid deployment. As folks are realizing that they need to add video teleconferencing to more and more spaces, this is a very easy way to accomplish it. These have been very popular in the telehealth world because you can roll them around, roll them in and out of patient rooms, etc. But if you think about the needs to deploy a video teleconferencing system in a conventional paradigm, I need to figure out how I'm going to mount the display, where I'm going to mount the controller. There's no mounting here. In this case, it's simply rolling in the cart, plugging it into the network and giving it power, and away you go. Another huge differentiator here with Crestron is the room control. We call it the flex button. So when you tap that button, it's going to enable custom room controls. This happens to be my conference room in Cyprus, but this can be any user interface that you can think of. In this case, we have discrete source selection. I can ingest a whiteboard digitizing piece. I can control my lights, privacy shades, outside window shades, and PTZ controls for the camera. Another major Crestron difference is mode swap. As companies and organizations and educational institutions are finding their way with this new paradigm of video teleconferencing and supporting remote workforces and students, they're having to make some very big decisions in terms of platform choice, right? What are we going to standardize? And of course, we all know the big gorillas are Zoom and Teams. But there's a lot of companies who they're kind of Zoom today, they see a long-term roadmap to Teams, or vice versa, right? So we're one of the only companies that offers this ability to protect your hardware investment. If at some point down the road you say, gosh, we're going to go with Teams or we're going to go with Zoom, it's simply a matter of an administrative mode swap, and the system reboots into a Teams room or a Zoom room. Another huge difference, which is going to segue me into Crestron XIO, is the ability to leverage our people counting in creating alerts, right? So previous to the pandemic, our concern was, let's give very usable, actionable information to the real estate folks. And how do we best do that? Well, occupancy is good, right? That can tell us if folks showed up to meetings that they booked, or people just showed up to meetings that they didn't book. It can give us a lot of rich data just by having an occupancy sensor in there. But going a step further, people want to know how are these rooms being used, right? If I have a slew of 12-person conference rooms and consistently they're getting 3 and 4 people, and the rooms are constantly booked, I know that I've got a room allocation problem, right? I need more smaller rooms. And this kind of information can help those real estate folks make those planning decisions for the future. So a little bit about XIO Cloud. and some examples of what we've got here. In this case, this is a dashboard from XIO Cloud that leverages people count and our new ability to create alerts based on occupancy count. So in this sense, you can see how often occupancy was exceeded, how often it wasn't, etc. Sorry, I'm gonna pause this. There we go. So this gives the facility folks and even the HR folks and whoever else is managing these people in spaces the ability to identify trends, identify patterns. Are there specific parts of the day? Are there specific rooms where this is more problematic than others? And adjust standard operating procedures accordingly. This dashboard is showing something a little unique. So this is a combination of that occupancy sensor and scheduling panel. So just those two pieces of hardware tied into Crestron XIO Cloud gives us some very rich data. In this case, we're looking at a visualization of how these rooms were used over a course of time and by whom. Okay, so we're visualizing idle time, used time, which is where it was actually being used, people were actually in the room, the amount of time it was released, and the amount of time it was recovered, right? So recovered is the ultimate goal here. So that is, those rooms were booked, no one showed up, we released the room back to inventory, and someone else came and booked that space. All right, so this can give us some incredible insights as to how these rooms are being used. And this is all automated analytics. So in the past, this would have required writing this data to some SQL database and using some visualization tool like Microsoft Power BI or Tableau or some other tool. And we can still certainly do that. And in fact, we're leveraging Power BI for our dashboards, but this makes it very, very easy. All you have to do is claim the hardware into XIO Cloud, and XIO Cloud goes to work. You've got dashboards. And after 24 hours of use, you start having historical data that you can visualize as a dashboard. We understand that another huge component of new realities is doing more with less in terms of staff, especially in terms of staff being able to get on site and do stuff, right, and interact with people. A lot of new policies that we're seeing with organizations is reducing the number of people in a place at a time, and that would include support staff. So the more that we can do remotely, the more we can empower these folks to do stuff from either their home office or some other place in the facility, the better off things are going to be. So in this example, what I'm showing is a feature that's built into all of Crestron touchscreens, which is remote control. So simply by claiming this Crestron touchscreen into our XIO Cloud portal, we have this ability of remote control. So not only can I peer in and see what's happening on that touchscreen, in this case, it's a Microsoft Teams room, and this is the touchscreen that's sitting on the table controlling that call. I actually did this and took this screenshot today live from the room. But it also gives us the ability to interact with that touchscreen. So for remote help desk type of situations where a user is saying, gosh, I'm not seeing my image, I can't see what's going on. There's a number of things that we can do here in the portal. We can see what they're looking at on the user interface. Are they controlling the right thing, for instance? And you can click that request control button and actually interact with that touchscreen remotely. Again, no extra programming. It's built right into the firmware of the hardware, whether it's in Teams mode or Zoom mode, or it's a custom user interface running on that touchscreen, you're gonna see what's on that touchscreen and be able to interact with it. Additionally, if we think elsewhere in the space, like the Teams room system or the Zoom room system, I'm gonna wanna see if the camera is attached, if the sound system is attached, if there's HDMI plugged in, if the display is plugged into the output. All of these things are going to be helpful for me to be able to peer in and see in a remote troubleshooting sense. And in a more proactive sense, so what I've described as reactive, but in a proactive sense, we can use any of those parameters and create alerts on them, such that the on-site tech gets an email and or text when one of those parameters changes states, and you can define all of those states, and you can define the audience. You know, if it's been offline for 1 minute, this set of people get it. If it's been offline for 120 minutes, a different set of people get it, or it gets ingested into a ticketing system for a paper trail. So all of these tools just built right into the portal. So it really is kind of the sticky tie that binds this entire solution together. So I'll be happy to open this up to questions. The QR code here, you can scan it with your phone. This will take you to a link. It's kind of the long form white paper format of the talk that I just gave. Do we have any questions?
We do, Matt.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Yeah, I have one if I may jump the queue, and I may have missed it because you can imagine maybe we're communicating behind the scenes a little bit here, make sure everything's going well. But could you speak again about the ability to do counting of people in the conference rooms, which I think you showed on one of your analytics? I did not understand how you guys accomplished that.
Great question. Thanks for that, David. So our Flex systems, they all ship with cameras, and the cameras have the ability to see number of faces in the room, right? We're not identifying individuals and saying that's David, that's Nicole, that's Matt. Instead, we're saying that's a face, that's a face, that's a face, and it does work with masks, so that's good to know. And then we take that number, and through our compute, the engine part of the Teams room or Zoom room systems, we can convey that data to XIO Cloud. And in each room in XIO Cloud, you can set an occupancy threshold individually, right? So exceeded threshold is going to mean something different for a small room versus a large room. So maybe it's 4 people in room A and 10 people in room B. So if it gets to 6 people in room A and 12 people in room B, I'll get an alert that the maximum capacity threshold has been exceeded. So long story short, it's actually built into the camera systems of these collaboration room systems.
Excellent, thank you. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thanks, David. We do have another question from Joe. Are the monitors and carts included in the R-Series solution?
Great question. The carts are, so pretty much everything you need, the cables, even the retractors for the cables, the collaboration system, and the cart itself is included. The display is not included in those solutions.
Okay, fantastic. Do we have any more questions? David, any more questions? All right.
Well, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, David.
I mean, Crestron has such an extensive line. They could have done the whole day of content here.
Yeah.
Could you just elaborate a little bit, Matt, about the ability to come in and control the room touch-free? And I think you showed a personal device. Does that allow you to have the full GUI, or what does that allow the user to actually see and accomplish?
Great question. So that's a brand new offering from us called Crestron One. It is a free download application, and this is part of a much bigger, longer range vision that we've been working on for a long, long time. Before COVID was a twinkle in anyone's eye. What we did is we pulled this particular part of it forward, recognizing the need to pivot and be nimble with this particular piece of it. So right now today, it is going to be a very simplified user interface with your core controls, right? It's built in HTML5. It's a mobile-first design, so it's not just a miniaturized version of what you see on the 10-inch touchscreen. That would be, in most cases, difficult to work with, right, on a smaller phone screen. So what we enable folks like you to do is take the existing room, figure out which buttons are most important to put on a mobile control device. You configure that, you load that configuration to the touch screen, and then that's what gets pushed to the phone, okay? So you don't actually have to go reprogram anything. If the existing system is up and running using a standard GUI, you simply define which buttons on that GUI you want to show up on the phone. You load that configuration to the touch screen. I didn't have to touch the control system programming. I didn't have to touch the GUI configuration or layout on the GUI. It's very easy to do with a simple. I mean, it's literally done in Excel. It couldn't be more approachable and non-proprietary if you tried.
Got it. Thank you very much.
We do
Absolutely.
have another question. Does this work with the existing cameras in an existing setup, referring to the people recognizing?
Yeah, so the people counting is it's intelligence that's built into the Huddly IQ camera and coming soon to the Aver camera that we're including in our larger room kits. So it is built into the camera itself. So we can't just take any old camera and get at that data. It's possible in the future that the platforms themselves will enable this type of data to be kicked out via API, whether that be Zoom or Microsoft. But right now today, with the immediacy, we're able to do it right now with the intelligence that's built into the cameras.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Looks like we might have one more question. Does Crestron, this question's from Robert, does Crestron provide training to reprogram panels, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So if this is talking about implementing Crestron 1, certainly. Most of our training has gone online, obviously, and that is something that we make available to all of our partners free of charge. And one of the trainings available online as a self-paced tutorial is how to implement Crestron 1. It is a pretty simple process.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Matt. Again, that's Matt with Crestron.